Something unimaginable happened 30 years ago. A class of students vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers and unanswered questions. The case was buried, forgotten until now. A desperate mother, tormented by the disappearance of her own children, stumbles upon a photograph, and what she sees changes everything. A woman, a face that shouldn't be there. Who is she? Why does she look exactly the same after all these years? As secrets unravel and betrayals surface, the past refuses to stay buried. What happened to those children? And why does the truth seem impossible? Stay until the end, because what you're about to hear will leave you breathless. Subscribe now and tell us where you're watching from. We need to know if you're ready for the truth. The morning light streamed through the thin curtains, casting a dull glow over the Petersons' modest home. The air inside felt heavy, thick with unspoken words and exhausted sighs. Caroline Peterson stood in the small kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter as she listened to the distant sound of the shower running. She was tired in a way that went beyond sleepless nights or long days. It was the kind of exhaustion that settled into her bones, that made even the simplest tasks feel impossible. But there was no time to rest, not today, not ever. Behind her, a small voice spoke, hesitant yet sweet. "Mommy, are we going to church today?" Caroline turned to see her 8-year-old daughter, Lily, standing in the doorway, her golden hair slightly messy from sleep, her bright blue eyes filled with innocence. Caroline forced a smile, her heart clenching at the sight of her. "Of course we are, baby. Go get ready. Okay?" Lily nodded and ran off, leaving Caroline alone again. She let out a breath, closing her eyes for just a moment before the sound of the bathroom door opening brought her back. Her husband, David, stepped into the hallway, a towel draped around his shoulders. He barely glanced at her as he passed. "We need to talk," Caroline said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. David sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Caroline, not now. I'm late." "No, you're not," she snapped, her frustration bubbling over. "You're just avoiding this. You always do." David stopped, turning to face her, his expression unreadable. "Avoiding what?" "The same argument we've had 100 times. Yes, because nothing ever changes. David, you're never here. You're always working late, always too busy. And when you are home, you're not really here." Her voice broke slightly, but she held her ground. David ran a hand through his damp hair, exhaling sharply. "I work late because I have to, Caroline. Someone has to pay the bills." "That's not what this is about," she said, shaking her head. "Lily barely sees you. I barely see you." David glanced toward the hallway, where Lily's door was slightly ajar. His voice lowered. "Can we not do this right now?" Caroline clenched her jaw. "Fine, but don't expect me to keep pretending everything's okay." She turned away, grabbing her purse and slipping on her coat. She wouldn't cry. Not now. Not in front of him. "Where are you going?" David asked, his voice softer now. "Church. With Lily." David hesitated, then nodded. "I'll see you later." But he wouldn't. Not really. Caroline took Lily's hand as they stepped outside, the crisp autumn air biting against her skin. As they walked down the street toward St. Mark's Church, Caroline tried to push away the lingering ache in her chest. She needed to focus on Lily. Today was about her. The church was already filling with people when they arrived. Warm light from the stained glass windows painted the wooden pews in shades of red and gold. Familiar faces greeted them with smiles, but Caroline barely registered them. She led Lily to their usual spot, her mind still tangled with the argument. Lily swung her feet, humming softly. "Mommy, can I go to the bathroom?" Caroline hesitated. "Can't you wait until after the service?" Lily shook her head, looking up at her with pleading eyes. Caroline sighed. "All right, but come right back. Okay?" Lily grinned. "Okay." She hopped off the pew and hurried down the aisle, disappearing through the side door. Caroline watched her go, a strange feeling settling in her stomach. Minutes passed, then more. Caroline glanced at her watch. Lily should have been back by now. Her heart started to race. She turned in her seat, scanning the congregation. No sign of her. She stood, excusing herself as she hurried toward the restroom. The hallway was empty. The door to the bathroom was slightly ajar. Caroline pushed it open, calling softly, "Lily?" Silence. The stalls were empty. A cold wave of panic washed over her. She rushed back to the main hall, her breath quickening. "Have you seen my daughter?" she asked a woman near the entrance. The woman frowned. "Your daughter?" "Yes, Lily. She went to the bathroom and never came back." A few people turned, concern spreading through the room. "She was just here," another woman said. "I saw her heading toward the back exit." Caroline's stomach dropped. She ran. The back doors were slightly open, a sliver of daylight cutting through the dim hallway. She pushed them open, stepping outside into the cold autumn air. The parking lot was nearly empty. No Lily. She turned frantically, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "Lily!" No response. A hand touched her shoulder, and she spun around. It was Father Thomas, his face creased with concern. "Caroline, what's wrong?" "She's gone," Caroline whispered, her voice breaking. "Lily is gone." The next hours blurred together in a nightmare. The police arrived, asking questions that Caroline couldn't answer. Had Lily seemed different today? Had she said anything strange? Did she have a history of running away? No! Caroline snapped, her desperation growing. She wouldn't just leave. Someone took her. But there was no sign of a struggle. No witnesses. No clues. Just a single object left behind near the church's back exit. Lily's tiny silver necklace. Caroline picked it up with trembling fingers, her breath hitching. David arrived soon after, his face pale. "Where is she?" he demanded. Caroline shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "She's gone." The days turned into weeks. The weeks into months. Posters of Lily's face covered the town. Caroline barely slept, barely ate. She spent every moment searching, knocking on doors, pleading for answers. But there were none. Then, exactly 1 year later, on the anniversary of Lily's disappearance, a letter arrived at their doorstep. No return address, just a single sheet of paper inside. In childish, familiar handwriting, it read, "Mommy, I'm still here." Caroline's hands shook as she read the words over and over. David grabbed the letter, his face darkening. This is someone's sick joke. Caroline wasn't so sure. She turned the paper over, her breath catching as she noticed a faint imprint on the back. It was a drawing of a woman Caroline recognized. A woman who, 30 years ago, had been standing in the background of an old school photo, watching, waiting. The case was never solved. But now it had just begun again. The letter trembled in Caroline's hands as she read it again, her mind racing. The ink on the page, the uneven strokes of each letter, the way the words curled slightly at the edges. It was Lily's handwriting. It had to be, but that was impossible. Lily had been gone for a year, a whole year of searching, of hoping, of fearing the worst. Caroline had spent every waking moment looking for her daughter, plastering posters on every wall, knocking on strangers' doors, begging the police for updates that never came. And now, after all this time, a letter had arrived. A letter that shouldn't exist. A letter that whispered of a nightmare that wasn't over. David's voice cut through the fog in her mind. "Caroline, this doesn't mean anything." He snatched the paper from her hands, scanning the words as if looking for a clue, some indication that this was a hoax. "It's just a cruel joke. Someone knows how much you've been suffering and decided to mess with you." His fingers crumpled the paper slightly, his jaw tightening. "We should throw it away." No, Caroline reached for the letter, her voice sharper than she intended. She pressed it against her chest as if it were something sacred, something real. "This is from Lily." David let out a short, humorless laugh. "You don't actually believe that, do you?" He ran a hand over his face, exhaling. "Caroline, we've been over this. She's gone. We have to accept that." But Caroline wasn't listening. She flipped the paper over, her breath catching in her throat as she stared at the faint drawing on the back. It was a woman, her face blurred but familiar. A woman with a long coat, her hair pulled back into a tight bun. The same woman Caroline had seen in that old class photo, the one she had barely noticed at first. The substitute teacher. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She had to find out who this woman was. Without another word, she stormed past David, grabbing her coat and the envelope. "Where are you going?" he called after her, frustration laced in his voice. "To the school," she said, determination burning through her exhaustion. "I need to see that photo again." David muttered something under his breath but didn't stop her. He had given up a long time ago. He had buried Lily in his mind, convinced himself that moving on was the only option. But Caroline couldn't do that. She wouldn't. She drove through town, her hands gripping the wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The school stood just as it always had, a building full of memories that now felt more like ghosts. She parked outside, hesitating only a moment before stepping through the front doors. The hallways smelled of floor polish and paper, the distant hum of students filling the air. The walls were lined with class photos from past years, rows of smiling faces frozen in time. Caroline walked past them, her eyes scanning each one until she found the one she was looking for. There, Lily's second grade class. Her breath caught as she traced her fingers over the photograph, her heart hammering in her chest. There was Lily, standing in the front row, her blonde hair tucked neatly behind her ears, her small hands folded in front of her. She looked so happy, so alive. But Caroline's gaze shifted, moving toward the back, toward the shadowed figure she had barely noticed before. The woman. She was there, standing off to the side, just slightly out of focus. A substitute teacher, or at least that's what the school had claimed. But there was something wrong, something Caroline hadn't noticed before. The woman's face, it hadn't changed. Not in 30 years. A chill ran down her spine as she took a step back, her head spinning. That wasn't possible. No one stayed the same after 3 decades. No one. Mrs. Peterson? The voice startled her, and she turned to see the school principal, Mr. Whitmore, standing in the hallway. His expression was careful, polite, but there was something guarded in his eyes. "Is there something I can help you with?" Caroline swallowed, pointing to the photo. "Who is this woman?" Mr. Whitmore's eyes flickered toward the picture, and for just a second, his expression faltered. He hesitated. "That's Miss Eleanor. She was a substitute teacher here. A long time ago." "How long ago?" He shifted uncomfortably. "She worked here years back, but she was never a full-time staff member." Caroline stared at him. "Do you know where she is now?" Mr. Whitmore forced a small smile. "I'm afraid I don't, but I can look through the records for you." Something about his tone sent a wave of unease through her. He was lying. She nodded anyway. "I'd appreciate that." As she turned to leave, a voice echoed from behind her. "You're looking in the wrong place." She froze. Slowly, she turned back toward the hall. A woman stood at the far end, half hidden in the shadows near the exit. Her dark eyes locked onto Caroline's, and a strange shiver ran through her spine. "Excuse me?" Caroline asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman took a step forward, but before Caroline could see her clearly, a group of students rushed past, momentarily blocking her view. And when they were gone, so was the woman. Caroline's heart pounded as she ran toward the exit, shoving the doors open. The parking lot was empty, the cold wind biting against her skin. No one was there, but on the ground, just a few feet away, lay a folded piece of paper. Hands trembling, she picked it up, unfolding it carefully. Inside was a single sentence, scrawled in handwriting that was painfully familiar. "Mommy, I'm still waiting." Caroline clutched the note to her chest, her breath ragged. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't imagining things. Lily was out there, somewhere. She turned back toward the school, her mind racing. Someone was hiding the truth. And if no one else was willing to find it, she would. Even if it meant unraveling secrets that had been buried for 30 years. Caroline sat in her car, gripping the folded note in her trembling hands. The words burned into her mind. "Mommy, I'm still waiting." Lily's handwriting, or at least something that looked exactly like it. Her heart pounded so hard it ached, and her breath came in shallow gasps. How was this possible? How could she have spent a year drowning in grief, believing her daughter was gone forever, only to be met with these impossible breadcrumbs? Someone was playing with her, toying with her fragile hope. But why? And who? She looked up at the school entrance, her fingers tightening around the paper. Someone in that building knew something. Someone had to. Mr. Whitmore's nervous hesitation, the mysterious woman in the shadows, and most importantly, Miss Eleanor. The woman in the photograph. The woman who hadn't aged in 30 years. The thought sent another chill down Caroline's spine. With shaking hands, she pulled out her phone and did a quick search. Miss Eleanor, Lakeshore Elementary School. Nothing. She tried again. Miss Eleanor, substitute teacher 30 years ago. Still nothing. It was like she had never existed. Caroline closed her eyes, forcing herself to take a deep breath. If the school records weren't going to give her answers, she would have to find them herself. There was one place she hadn't checked in a long time: the storage boxes in her attic. If there was anything about Miss Eleanor in Lily's old school papers, she was going to find it. She turned the key in the ignition, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wasn't giving up. Not now. Not ever. The house was silent when she arrived. David's car was gone. Probably at work, pretending none of this was happening. Caroline didn't care. She went straight up to the attic, pulling down the old wooden ladder and climbing up into the dim, dust-filled space. The air smelled stale, untouched for months. She flicked on the small light bulb, its weak glow casting eerie shadows across the piles of boxes stacked against the walls. She crouched down, shoving aside old Christmas decorations and forgotten keepsakes, searching for the ones labeled Lily's schoolwork. Her hands found a worn cardboard box, the edges frayed from years of storage. She dragged it toward her, her breath catching as she lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of papers, crayon drawings, and school reports. And then, at the very bottom, she saw it. An old class newsletter from last year. Her fingers shook as she unfolded the page, scanning the columns of printed text until she found the list of substitute teachers. There, Miss Eleanor. Caroline's pulse pounded in her ears. She wasn't imagining it. Miss Eleanor had been at the school. She ran a finger down the paper, looking for more information, but there was nothing. No last name, no contact details, just the name buried among a dozen others. Frustration burned through her. Why was she listed if she didn't exist anywhere else? Caroline dug deeper into the box, flipping through Lily's old worksheets, searching for anything else. And then, a drawing. A child's drawing, done in crayon, with wobbly lines and uneven shapes. Lily's name was scribbled in the corner in her small, careful handwriting. It was a picture of a classroom. A row of children sat at their desks, their smiling faces drawn in bright colors. But Caroline's breath caught when she saw the figure standing at the front. The teacher, drawn in black crayon. Her face was featureless, just a dark, empty outline. Caroline's chest tightened. She ran her fingers over the paper, as if touching it would give her answers. Lily had drawn this. Had she been afraid of her teacher? Had she known something? A sound from downstairs made her freeze. A soft, almost hesitant knock at the front door. Caroline's stomach twisted. No one ever visited unannounced. She quickly folded the drawing and stuffed it into her pocket before climbing down from the attic. Her footsteps were silent as she moved through the house, her heart pounding with every step. She peered through the small window beside the door. A woman stood outside, the same woman from the school, the one who had whispered, "You're looking in the wrong place." Caroline's breath hitched. She hesitated for only a second before unlocking the door and pulling it open. The woman didn't move. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back into a tight bun. Her eyes, deep and unreadable, studied Caroline with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "Who are you?" Caroline demanded, gripping the doorframe to steady herself. The woman tilted her head slightly. "You don't remember me, do you?" Her voice was calm, almost distant. Caroline narrowed her eyes. Should I? A small, almost sad smile crossed the woman's lips. I knew your daughter. Caroline's heart stopped. The woman glanced around, then took a step forward. May I come in? Every instinct screamed at Caroline to say no. But if this woman knew something about Lily, she couldn't risk letting her leave. She stepped aside. The woman entered, her eyes sweeping over the house as if it were familiar to her. Caroline shut the door, arms crossed, trying to keep her voice steady. How do you know Lily? The woman turned to face her, her expression unreadable. Because I was once like her. Caroline blinked. What are you talking about? The woman hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket, pulling out an old photograph. She handed it to Caroline, who took it with shaking hands. It was a faded, yellowed picture of a classroom. And there, among the rows of students, was a little girl who looked eerily familiar. Blonde hair, blue eyes. Lily. Caroline's breath caught. No, this is wrong. This photo is old. The woman nodded. 30 years old, to be exact. Caroline's pulse pounded in her ears. That's not possible. But it was, because standing in the background, just like in Lily's class photo, was Miss Eleanor, looking exactly the same. Caroline staggered back, the photograph slipping from her fingers. What is this? The woman met her gaze. The truth. Caroline shook her head. No, this doesn't make sense. But deep down, a horrible realization was clawing its way into her mind. Her daughter hadn't just disappeared. She had been taken into something much bigger. And whatever it was, it had been happening for a long, long time. Caroline's breath came in shallow gasps as she stared at the old photograph on the floor. The edges curled slightly, the faded ink threatening to disappear with time. Yet the image was clear. 30 years old, an entire class of children. And there, among them, her daughter, her Lily. But it wasn't possible. Lily hadn't even been born 30 years ago. Yet there she was, staring up at the camera with the same wide, innocent blue eyes. And in the background, standing just out of focus, was Miss Eleanor. Unchanged. Not a single wrinkle. Not a hint of aging. Just the same, standing there like a ghost frozen in time. Caroline swallowed hard, forcing herself to look up at the woman in front of her. The one who had brought this photograph. The woman who claimed she knew Lily. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Who are you? The woman exhaled slowly, her dark eyes locked onto Caroline's as if searching for something, some flicker of recognition that wasn't there. My name is Evelyn. Caroline clenched her fists, trying to steady her trembling hands. You said you were like Lily. What does that mean? Evelyn hesitated, glancing toward the window as if expecting someone, or something, to be watching. Then, lowering her voice, she said, It means that I was in the same place she is now. Caroline's stomach twisted. And where is that? Evelyn's expression darkened. Somewhere she was never meant to be. A chill ran through Caroline. Every nerve in her body screamed for her to push further, to demand answers, but the words stuck in her throat. A year of grief, a year of searching, and suddenly, the truth felt far more terrifying than the unknown. Evelyn took a step closer. I can help you find her, but you have to trust me. Caroline's voice came out sharp. I don't trust anyone anymore. Evelyn didn't flinch. Then trust your daughter. She led you here, didn't she? The note, the drawing, the impossible photograph. Caroline swallowed back the lump in her throat. What happened to Lily? Evelyn hesitated again, as if choosing her words carefully. They take them, children who don't belong. Caroline's skin prickled. Who takes them? Evelyn's expression turned unreadable. People who don't age. People who are waiting for something or someone to return. Caroline felt her knees weaken, her grip tightening on the back of the chair beside her. Miss Eleanor. Evelyn nodded once. Caroline shook her head, her mind spinning. But that doesn't make sense. Why would she take my daughter? Why was she at my daughter's school? Evelyn's voice was barely above a whisper. Because she was looking for her. Caroline's pulse pounded in her ears. Looking for her? What does that even mean? Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line. She's been looking for all of us. A heavy silence filled the room. The weight of Evelyn's words crushed Caroline's chest, making it hard to breathe. Caroline forced herself to speak. If that's true, then where are they? Where is Lily? Evelyn's gaze darkened. Hidden, just like we were. The word "we" sent another shiver through Caroline. She could barely process what was happening, but she knew one thing. This woman wasn't lying. There was something in her eyes, something haunted, something that told Caroline she had seen things no one should ever see. Caroline felt the walls of her mind closing in. She thought back to all those long, sleepless nights searching for answers, only to be met with dead ends. She thought about the posters, the police reports, the empty prayers. And now, standing in front of her, was someone offering her the one thing she had been begging for. The truth. Caroline took a slow, steadying breath. How do we find her? Evelyn hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a small, folded piece of paper. She handed it to Caroline. Caroline unfolded it carefully. It was an address she recognized. The abandoned school on the outskirts of town. The same school where, 30 years ago, an entire class of children had disappeared. Caroline's heart pounded. She had driven past it countless times, its crumbling walls and shattered windows standing as a quiet reminder of something the town had long since forgotten. Evelyn watched her closely. You know the place, don't you? Caroline's voice was barely a whisper. Yes. Evelyn nodded. Then you know where to start. Caroline looked up, her determination cutting through the fear tightening around her ribs. If you're lying to me, I'm not. Evelyn's voice was steady, unwavering. I want to find her just as much as you do. Caroline didn't know if that was true, but she knew she couldn't stop now. She had to go. She had to find Lily, even if it meant uncovering something she was never meant to see. Caroline stood in the dim light of her living room, gripping the small piece of paper in her hands. The address stared back at her, the ink slightly smudged from the sweat on her fingers. The abandoned school, a place she had always ignored, always driven past without a second thought. And now it held the one answer she had been searching for. Lily. Evelyn watched her carefully, her expression unreadable. The silence between them was heavy, thick with unspoken fears. Caroline swallowed, forcing her voice to stay steady. If we go there, will we find her? Evelyn hesitated before speaking. We might find something. It wasn't the answer Caroline wanted, but it was the only one she had. She turned toward the staircase, her thoughts racing. I need to change. I can't do this dressed like... She motioned toward herself, still in her soft cardigan and worn jeans. She needed something sturdy, something she could move in. Evelyn simply nodded, as if she understood. Caroline hurried upstairs, her heart pounding in her chest. In her bedroom, she pulled on a pair of old sneakers and a heavier jacket, something that could protect her from the cold autumn night. She caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Tired eyes, pale skin, a face that had aged years in just 12 months. A face that barely looked like her own anymore. She turned away, ignoring the ache in her chest. When she came back down, Evelyn was still standing near the door, her hands tucked into the pockets of her long coat. Ready? Caroline nodded. Let's go. The drive to the abandoned school was quiet. The town's streetlights cast long, eerie shadows over the empty roads. It was late now, past midnight, and everything felt heavier, as if the world itself was holding its breath. As they approached the outskirts of town, the air seemed to shift. The houses disappeared, replaced by empty lots and overgrown fields. And then, through the thinning trees, Caroline saw it. The old school. It stood alone, swallowed by time. The brick walls were cracked, the windows shattered. Ivy crept along the sides, reclaiming the structure as if nature itself wanted to erase it. The large, rusted gates hung open, creaking softly in the wind. Caroline parked the car a few feet away. She hesitated, gripping the steering wheel for just a moment before glancing at Evelyn. Are you sure about this? Evelyn met her gaze. "Are you?" Caroline took a deep breath. Then she opened the door. The cold air hit her instantly, biting at her exposed skin. She pulled her jacket tighter around herself as she stepped forward, gravel crunching beneath her feet. Evelyn followed, her movements slow and deliberate. The school loomed ahead, silent, watching. Caroline felt her chest tighten as she pushed through the rusted gate, stepping onto the cracked pavement. The building's front doors were boarded up, thick planks nailed haphazardly across the entrance. But there was another way in. "There's a side door," Evelyn murmured, already walking toward it. Caroline followed, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Every nerve in her body screamed that this was wrong, that she should turn back, but she kept moving. When they reached the side of the building, Evelyn paused. She pressed a hand against the old wooden door, testing it. The hinges groaned, but the door didn't budge. Caroline looked around. "We need another way." Before she could finish, Evelyn reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small and metallic. A key. Caroline's eyes widened. "How do you?" But Evelyn simply slid the key into the rusted lock and turned it. The door clicked open. Caroline shivered. This wasn't just an abandoned building to Evelyn. She had been here before. The door creaked as it swung inward, revealing a long, dark hallway. Dust hung in the air, illuminated by the sliver of moonlight filtering through the broken windows. The scent of mildew and decay filled Caroline's nose. She hesitated at the threshold. Evelyn stepped inside first. "Stay close." Caroline followed, her footsteps echoing against the cracked tile floors. The hallway stretched into darkness, lined with old lockers, their doors hanging open like gaping mouths. Papers were scattered across the ground, forgotten lesson plans and torn pages from old textbooks. She swallowed hard. Somewhere in this building there was an answer. Somewhere in this building, Lily's trail had been left behind. They moved cautiously, their footsteps the only sound in the suffocating silence. Caroline's fingers traced the cold metal of the lockers as they passed, her heart hammering in her chest. Then, from deep within the school, a sound. Faint, distant hum. Caroline froze. Evelyn stiffened beside her. The noise was low, almost mechanical, like an old projector coming to life. Caroline's throat tightened. "Do you hear that?" Evelyn nodded slowly. "We're not alone." The words sent ice down Caroline's spine. She swallowed, forcing her feet to move. They followed the sound down the hall, past empty classrooms with desks covered in dust, past bulletin boards with tattered posters curling at the edges, past walls lined with photos of students long forgotten. The sound grew louder, and then, at the end of the hallway, they found the source. An old television, its screen flickering. Caroline's breath caught. It was playing something. A classroom scene. Rows of students sitting at their desks. Their faces were blurred, distorted by the static. But Caroline's stomach twisted as she recognized the setting. This school. This room. And standing at the front of the class, Miss Eleanor. Caroline's hands clenched into fists. "What the hell is this?" Evelyn's voice was quiet. "Proof." Caroline stared at the screen, her heart hammering. Then slowly she stepped forward. The static crackled, distorting the image. She squinted, trying to make out the faces of the children. Then, all at once, the static cut out. The screen went black. Silence. Caroline's breath hitched. Then, a new image appeared. Lily, sitting at a desk, looking directly into the camera. Caroline staggered back, her blood turning to ice. "No!" Lily's mouth moved. No sound came out. Caroline clutched at the TV, desperate to hear her daughter's voice. "Lily!" The screen flickered, and then, in the reflection of the glass, Caroline saw something. A shadow moving behind her. She spun around, but there was nothing. Just the empty, dark hallway. Caroline's pulse thundered. She turned back to the screen. Lily was gone. The screen was blank again. Then, slowly, a new message appeared in the flickering static. "Mommy, I'm still waiting." Caroline let out a shaky breath, her fingers trembling as she reached toward the screen. The air around her felt heavier now, the walls of the school pressing in. Lily had been here, and maybe, just maybe, she still was. Caroline's breath came in short, ragged gasps. The words on the screen blurred as tears welled in her eyes. "Mommy, I'm still waiting." The message pulsed in the flickering glow of the old television, burning itself into her mind. Her trembling fingers hovered over the dusty surface, as if touching it would somehow bring Lily back. But the screen remained cold, silent. Behind her, Evelyn stood motionless, her expression unreadable. "She was here," Caroline whispered, her voice barely audible. "She's been here." Evelyn didn't respond. She simply watched, as if she had seen this before, as if she already knew the answer. Caroline turned sharply toward her, her pulse hammering. "You knew we'd find this, didn't you?" Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. "I knew you needed to see it." Caroline's hands clenched into fists. "Stop speaking in riddles. If you know where Lily is, just tell me." Evelyn hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. "This place is a doorway," she finally said. "A place where time doesn't move the way it should." Caroline's stomach twisted. "What the hell does that mean?" Evelyn exhaled, running a hand through her dark hair. "It means Lily's not just missing. She's caught in something that was never meant to be reopened." The words sent a chill through Caroline's body. She looked around the empty classroom, the peeling paint, the dust-covered desks that hadn't been touched in years. And yet, Lily's face had been on that screen, as if she had just been sitting here, as if she was still here. Her hands tightened at her sides. "I need to see the rest of this place." Evelyn gave a slow nod, then turned toward the door. "Then let's go." The two women moved through the darkened hallways, their footsteps eerily loud in the silence. The school smelled of dust and time, of forgotten echoes. Caroline's fingers trailed along the cold metal lockers, her skin prickling with every step. She didn't know what she was expecting. A door that would lead her straight to Lily? A hidden room filled with all the missing children? She didn't know. But she knew she wouldn't stop until she found something. They turned a corner, and suddenly, the hallway opened into a larger space. The gymnasium. The old basketball hoops still hung from the walls, their nets long since rotted away. Bleachers stood against the far wall, covered in debris. The high windows let in thin streams of moonlight, casting long shadows that seemed to move as they stepped inside. Caroline hesitated, scanning the vast emptiness. Why does this place feel so? Then she saw it. At the center of the gym floor, beneath years of dust and grime, something was carved into the wood. Words. Names. Caroline moved closer, her heart pounding. She crouched down, brushing the dust away with her fingertips. And there, scratched into the floorboards, were dozens of names. Children's names. Her breath caught in her throat. Her eyes moved rapidly over them, one after another. Some were old, barely legible. Others were clearer, as if they had been added later. Then, her fingers froze over one name, Lily Peterson. Caroline gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She turned to Evelyn, her voice shaking. She was here. Evelyn nodded. They all were. Caroline's hands trembled as she traced the letters of Lily's name. She wanted to scream, cry, demand answers that Evelyn still wouldn't give her. But before she could say anything, something shifted in the air. A soft sound. A whisper. Caroline's head snapped up. It was faint, almost too quiet to be real. But it was there. A child's voice. "Mommy!" Caroline's entire body froze. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "Lily?" she whispered, barely able to say the name. The air around her seemed to hum, the room shifting, the walls pressing in. And then, from the far side of the gym, the double doors creaked open. Caroline's breath caught in her throat. A shadow stood there, small, still. She couldn't breathe. "Lily!" The figure didn't move. Caroline took a shaky step forward, her heart ready to burst out of her chest. She knew that silhouette, the way the hair fell over her shoulders, the small frame. It was Lily. It had to be. Tears blurred Caroline's vision as she took another step. "Baby, it's me. It's Mommy." The figure stood in the doorway, silent. Watching. Caroline's throat tightened. "Lily, please." Then, a flicker, like a glitch, and suddenly, the figure was gone, vanished. Caroline let out a strangled sob, her knees nearly buckling beneath her. "No, no, no, no." She ran. Through the gym, toward the doors, toward where Lily had been. She burst through them into the hallway beyond. Empty. Nothing. Just silence. Caroline spun around, her breath ragged. "Lily!" No answer. Just the quiet hum of something unseen. Evelyn stepped beside her, her voice soft. "She's close." Caroline turned on her, desperate. "Then where is she?" Evelyn hesitated. Then finally she said, "She's in the place where time forgot." Caroline's chest rose and fell rapidly. She didn't understand what that meant, but she was going to find out, because Lily wasn't gone. She was waiting, and Caroline wasn't leaving without her. Caroline's breath was unsteady, her heart hammering as she stared at the empty hallway where Lily had just been, or where she thought she had been. The air still felt charged, as if someone, had been there only moments ago. The sound of her daughter's voice still echoed in her mind, soft and distant, like a memory slipping through her fingers. Evelyn stood beside her, unmoving. Her dark eyes were unreadable, but Caroline could feel the weight of something unspoken pressing between them. "She was here," Caroline whispered, her voice hoarse. Evelyn nodded slowly. "Yes, but not in the way you think." Caroline turned sharply to her, frustration boiling beneath her skin. "Stop talking like that. Just tell me the truth. Where is she?" Evelyn hesitated. Then, with a quiet sigh, she gestured toward the hallway ahead. "Come with me." Caroline clenched her fists, anger and fear battling within her. But she had no choice. She followed. They walked in silence, the school's abandoned corridors stretching out endlessly before them. The walls seemed to breathe, shifting in the dim light. The air smelled of dust and something else. Something old, something forgotten. After what felt like forever, Evelyn finally stopped in front of a door. Unlike the others, this one was different. The wood was untouched by time, no dust clinging to its surface, no cracks in its paint. It looked as though it had just been placed there. Caroline swallowed hard. "What is this?" Evelyn pressed her fingers against the door, her voice soft. "The place where time forgot." Caroline's stomach twisted. She reached for the handle, her fingers trembling as she pushed the door open. A cold rush of air met her, sending a shiver down her spine. Beyond the door was not a classroom, not a hallway. It was something else entirely. A staircase, descending into darkness. Caroline's breath hitched. The steps were old, made of stone, spiraling downward into what seemed like an abyss. A strange humming sound vibrated through the air, low and constant, as if the walls themselves were alive. Evelyn stepped forward. "This is where they took us." Caroline snapped her head toward her. "What do you mean?" Evelyn didn't look at her. She just took the first step down. Caroline hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to run, to pretend she had never come here. But Lily was waiting, and Caroline had come too far to stop now. She took a deep breath and followed. The air grew colder the deeper they went. The humming sound grew louder. The steps seemed endless, spiraling downward in an impossible way, as if they were descending into a place that shouldn't exist. Then, finally, the staircase ended. Caroline stepped onto solid ground, her breath catching in her throat. It was a room, or something like one. The walls were lined with old chalkboards, covered in writing that had long since faded. Desks were scattered around, but they weren't placed like a normal classroom. They were facing the walls, as if the children who sat here weren't meant to look at each other. Caroline's skin prickled. She turned to Evelyn, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is this place?" Evelyn's gaze darkened. "A classroom for the forgotten." Caroline took a step forward, her foot nudging something on the floor. She looked down. A notebook. She bent down, picking it up with trembling hands. The cover was old, the pages yellowed. Slowly, she opened it. Her breath caught in her throat. The first page was covered in writing. Childish handwriting. A name at the top. Lily Peterson. Caroline's fingers tightened around the edges of the notebook. Her eyes scanned the page, her pulse roaring in her ears. The words were hurried, frantic. "Mommy, I don't know where I am. The other kids are here, but they don't talk. The teacher is always watching. I want to go home, but I don't think we're allowed to." Caroline's throat closed. Her knees nearly buckled. "Lily," she whispered. She flipped through the pages, her hands shaking. More writing. More desperate, uneven sentences. "Time doesn't move here. Miss Eleanor says we have to stay until we learn the lesson. But I don't understand the lesson." Caroline's breath hitched as she turned another page. And then, a drawing. A crayon drawing. Of a classroom. Children sitting at their desks. A woman standing at the front. And in the corner a door. With the words written in shaky letters. "The way out." Caroline pressed a hand to her mouth, her body shaking. A way out. Lily had been here. She had been here. And she had left this message behind. She turned to Evelyn, her eyes burning with desperation. "What does this mean?" Evelyn's gaze was unreadable. "It means she's still looking for the exit." Caroline felt something inside her snap. "Then we have to find it." Evelyn nodded. "Yes." Caroline turned back to the notebook, flipping through the pages desperately. Lily had left something behind. A clue. A message. Something that would lead her to wherever she was now. And then, near the very back of the book, she found it. A final message, scrawled in thick, desperate letters. "Mommy, find the door before she does." Caroline's blood ran cold. She barely noticed the way Evelyn stiffened beside her. Barely registered the way the room suddenly felt smaller. Then, a noise. From behind them, a soft, measured click. Like a door unlocking. Caroline turned slowly, her pulse hammering in her ears. At the far end of the room, a door had appeared. A door that hadn't been there before. Creaked open just slightly. And beyond it, darkness. Caroline's breath shuddered out of her. She turned back to the notebook, staring at Lily's final warning. "Find the door before she does." A shadow moved beyond the doorway. Something watching. Something waiting. Caroline tightened her grip on the notebook. And then, without another word, she stepped toward the door. Caroline's breath was shallow. Her body tense as she stood before the door that hadn't been there moments ago. The hinges groaned softly, swaying slightly as if beckoning her forward. The air beyond it was thick and unmoving, a suffocating stillness that sent ice crawling up her spine. A part of her screamed to turn back, to run. But she had come too far. She had seen too much, and Lily was still waiting. Evelyn was silent beside her, her dark eyes locked on the open doorway. There was something unreadable in her expression, something almost expectant. Caroline swallowed hard, gripping the notebook tightly in her hands. Lily's final words echoed in her mind. "Find the door before she does." But who was she? Caroline didn't want to know. She stepped forward. The moment she crossed the threshold, the air around her changed. It was subtle at first, the way the air felt heavier, pressing against her skin. The faint hum in the walls, no longer distant but surrounding her, vibrating in her bones. The smell, dust, old paper, and something else, something stale, like the scent of a room sealed shut for too long. The hallway stretched before her, impossibly long. The walls were lined with doors, identical and featureless, stretching into the distance. The dim light overhead flickered weakly, as if struggling to stay alive. Behind her, Evelyn followed, her footsteps unervingly quiet. Caroline's pulse pounded as she moved forward, her gaze darting from one door to the next. There was no way to tell them apart. No markings, no numbers, just endless, identical doors. She swallowed hard. Which one? Evelyn's voice was calm, measured. Not all doors lead to the same place. Caroline turned to her, frustration burning in her chest. What does that mean? Evelyn didn't answer. Caroline clenched her teeth, turning back to the hallway. Then, a sound. Soft, faint, a whisper. "Mommy!" Caroline froze. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew that voice. Lily. Her head snapped toward the source. One of the doors. It was slightly ajar, the darkness behind it stretching into nothingness. Caroline's hands trembled. "Lily!" Silence. Then, another whisper. "Mommy, hurry!" Caroline didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She ran. She shoved the door open, stepping into the darkness beyond, and the world shifted. The air folded around her, the floor vanishing beneath her feet. She was falling, weightless, the darkness swallowing her whole. The hum in the walls became a roar, vibrating through her skull, pulling her down, down, down. Then, silence. Caroline gasped, her body hitting solid ground. She coughed, struggling to breathe, the world spinning around her. Then, slowly, the darkness faded. She was standing in a classroom, but not the one from before. This one was different. The desks were pristine, perfectly arranged. The walls were lined with bright posters, the chalkboard at the front filled with neatly written sentences. A row of small coats hung on hooks by the door, their colors vibrant, untouched by dust or decay. It looked new. It looked lived in. Caroline's breath hitched. This wasn't an abandoned school. This was a classroom in use. And then, the sound of laughter, children's laughter. Caroline's heart stopped. She turned and saw them, rows of students, seated at their desks, pencils scratching against paper. They were real, alive, but something was wrong. Their faces. She couldn't see them clearly. No matter how hard she focused, their features were blurred, shifting, like a memory that refused to take shape. A shiver crawled down her spine. Then, at the front of the room, a figure, a woman, standing with her back turned, tall, motionless. Miss Eleanor. Caroline's breath caught. The woman turned slowly, her movements eerily precise. And then, her face. Caroline's stomach dropped. She had seen her before, not just in Lily's school, not just in the 30-year-old photograph. Somewhere else, somewhere deeper. Miss Eleanor smiled. "You shouldn't be here." Caroline's chest tightened. "Where's my daughter?" Miss Eleanor tilted her head slightly, as if studying her. "She was never lost." Caroline's fists clenched. "Where is she?" Miss Eleanor took a slow step forward. "The same place she has always been." Caroline's breath shuddered. "I don't understand." Miss Eleanor's smile widened slightly. "Yes, you do." Then, with a single motion, she gestured toward the students. Caroline turned, her breath caught in her throat. One of them, sitting near the back. Small, blonde hair, blue eyes. Lily. Caroline felt the world tilt. She took a step forward, her voice breaking. "Lily." The child didn't move, didn't look up, didn't react. Caroline's breath came in short gasps as she rushed forward, reaching out. But just as her fingers brushed against Lily's shoulder, the girl vanished. Caroline's knees buckled. "No!" Miss Eleanor's voice was calm. "You're looking at the past." Caroline's head snapped toward her. "What are you talking about?" Miss Eleanor smiled. "This is the lesson." The humming in the walls grew louder. The room seemed to stretch, the colors bleeding together. Caroline tried to stand, her vision warping, the air around her shifting. Miss Eleanor took a step closer, her eyes dark and endless. "Lily is waiting," she whispered. Caroline's breath shuddered out of her. Then, the world collapsed. Darkness swallowed her whole. Caroline gasped as she tumbled through the void. The air around her felt dense, pressing against her skin like unseen hands pulling her deeper into the abyss. There was no floor, no walls, just an endless darkness stretching in every direction. The hum in the air grew deafening, vibrating in her bones, making it hard to breathe. Then suddenly solid ground. She hit the floor hard, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. For a moment, she lay still, her chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. Her fingers dug into the surface beneath her, smooth, cold tile. A hallway, dimly lit, stretching endlessly in both directions. The walls were lined with closed doors, each identical, their wooden surfaces marked only by small brass handles. The humming was still there, softer now, a dull vibration beneath her skin. Caroline pushed herself up, her muscles aching. Her hands trembled as she took a step forward, then another. The air smelled different here, not like dust and decay, but something else, something sterile. Then a sound, footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from behind her. Caroline's breath caught. She turned. No one, just the hallway stretching into endless darkness. Her pulse pounded as she swallowed back the fear rising in her throat. She needed to find Lily. She needed to keep moving. She reached for the nearest door, fingers brushing against the brass handle. Slowly, she turned it, pushing the door open. A classroom, but not like the ones before. This one was perfect, bright, clean. The wooden desks were polished, neatly arranged in rows. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long golden rays across the floor. The chalkboard at the front was untouched, a single phrase written in elegant white cursive. Time is a circle. Caroline's pulse quickened. The room was eerily still. No dust, no signs of age or abandonment. And then, a child's laughter, soft, echoing. Caroline turned sharply, her heart slamming against her ribs. The sound came from the hallway. She stepped back, gripping the doorknob, her fingers slick with sweat. Then, slowly, she stepped out into the corridor. The laughter faded. Silence. Then, a whisper. "Mommy!" Caroline's breath hitched. She turned toward the sound, her vision blurring with unshed tears. Lily. She saw her, standing at the far end of the hallway, her small frame bathed in the dim glow of the flickering lights. Her blonde hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, just as Caroline remembered. She wore a simple white dress, her blue eyes wide, empty. Caroline's entire body shook. "Lily!" She ran. Lily turned and walked away. Caroline's pulse pounded as she sprinted forward, her feet barely touching the ground. "Lily, wait!" Lily moved faster, slipping through another door just as Caroline reached out. The door slammed shut. Caroline nearly crashed into it, her palms slamming against the wooden surface. "Lily!" She fumbled for the handle, twisting it desperately. Locked. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she banged against the door. "Lily, open the door. It's Mommy. Please, baby." Then, a voice. Soft. Familiar. "She's almost ready." Caroline's body went rigid. Slowly, she turned. The hallway behind her was no longer empty. A figure stood there. Miss Eleanor. Tall. Still. Watching. Her expression was unreadable, her hands folded neatly in front of her. "You shouldn't be here, Caroline." Caroline's blood ran cold. She took a step back, her breath shallow. "Where is my daughter?" Miss Eleanor tilted her head. "She's where she belongs." Caroline clenched her fists. "You took her." Miss Eleanor smiled, small, knowing. "She was chosen." Caroline's chest tightened. "Chosen for what?" Miss Eleanor took a slow step forward. "For something greater." Caroline's stomach twisted. She shook her head. "No, she's just a child. She doesn't belong here." Miss Eleanor's expression didn't change. "Neither did I." Caroline's breath caught. She stared at the woman, at her perfectly smooth skin, her ageless features. The realization hit her like a blow to the chest. Miss Eleanor had been one of them, one of the children. Caroline's voice was barely a whisper. "What is this place?" Miss Eleanor's gaze darkened. "A lesson." Caroline swallowed. "What kind of lesson?" Miss Eleanor smiled. "One that never ends." The lights overhead flickered. The humming in the walls grew louder. And then, the door behind Caroline unlocked. A slow, soft click. She turned sharply, her breath catching. Then, a voice. Small. Familiar. "Mommy!" Caroline's heart shattered. She shoved the door open, stepping inside, and the world shifted. The air warped around her, bending, twisting. The classroom beyond was wrong. The desks were empty. The windows were covered in black ink, swallowing the sunlight whole. The walls pulsed, alive, breathing, and there, at the center of the room, Lily, standing still, waiting. Caroline's breath broke into a sob. She rushed forward, grabbing Lily's small shoulders, pulling her close. "Baby, it's me. It's Mommy. I'm here, I found you." Lily's body didn't move. She was cold. Caroline's heart stopped. She pulled back, looking into Lily's face, and froze. Lily's eyes, not blue, black, like ink, like the windows, like the walls, like something that had been swallowed whole. Caroline's breath came in a sharp gasp. Then, Lily spoke, but her voice wasn't hers. "It's time to go home." Caroline's body went rigid. The room collapsed. Darkness rushed in. The humming in the walls turned into a scream. Then, nothing. Caroline's scream never left her lips. The world folded around her, pulling her downward, into a suffocating abyss where sound and time ceased to exist. The humming in the walls was gone, replaced by an unbearable silence. A silence so complete it pressed against her chest like a weight she couldn't shake. Then, a breath, her own, shaky, uneven, but real. Caroline's eyes flew open. She was lying on a cold, smooth floor, her body curled tightly as if she had been asleep for days. The air smelled sterile, faintly metallic, like a hospital ward that had been abandoned yet still held traces of life. Slowly, painfully, she pushed herself up. She wasn't in the school anymore. Or maybe she was. The room was white, blindingly so. White walls, white ceiling, white tiled floors stretching endlessly in every direction. No doors, no windows, just an infinite, sterile nothingness. Caroline's breath hitched. Where was she? She turned sharply, and Lily was there, standing just a few feet away, small, still. Her golden hair framed her delicate face, her blue eyes wide and empty. Caroline's breath broke. "Lily." She moved forward on unsteady legs, reaching out, but something stopped her. An invisible force, thick as glass, unyielding. Caroline's fingers pressed against nothing. A barrier she couldn't see, couldn't break. Lily stared at her, unmoving. Caroline's pulse pounded in her ears. "Baby, it's Mommy. Can you hear me?" No response. Then, a door. It hadn't been there before. But now, just beyond Lily, stood a single white door, and beside it Miss Eleanor. Watching, waiting. Caroline's heart clenched. "Let her go." Miss Eleanor tilted her head. "She doesn't belong to you anymore." Caroline's breath shook. "She's my daughter." Miss Eleanor's expression remained calm. She was chosen. Caroline's body trembled with rage. Chosen for what? Miss Eleanor took a step forward, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Time moves differently here. Some are taken, some are returned, and some... Her gaze flickered to Lily. Some stay. Caroline's mind reeled. Stay where? What are you talking about? Miss Eleanor's smile was small, knowing. Do you really think this is the first time this has happened? Caroline's throat tightened. The photographs, the names in the gym, the whispers of children who were never found. This had happened before. For years. For decades. She shook her head. No, I won't let this happen to her. Miss Eleanor's eyes darkened. You don't have a choice. Caroline's chest heaved. She turned back to Lily, pressing her hands against the invisible barrier. Lily, baby, look at me. Nothing. Then, a flicker. Something shifted behind her daughter's vacant blue eyes. Something trying to break free. Caroline's breath hitched. She's fighting it, she whispered. Miss Eleanor's expression hardened. The white room trembled. The walls cracked. The humming in the air returned. Lily blinked, slowly, her lips parting as if she wanted to speak. Then, a whisper. Mommy! Caroline's heart shattered. Yes, baby, I'm here. Lily's small hands lifted, pressing against the barrier, mirroring her mother's. Her voice was stronger. Take me home. Miss Eleanor moved. Too fast. She reached for Lily. Caroline screamed. The world shattered. The white room collapsed. Light exploded. Then, darkness. When Caroline opened her eyes, she was on the floor of the school gymnasium. The air was thick with dust, the scent of decay sharp in her nose. The windows were broken, moonlight streaming in through the shattered glass. Her breath was ragged. Her body ached, but none of that mattered, because in her arms, Lily, small, warm, real. Caroline gasped, pulling her daughter close, sobs racking her body. Lily whimpered softly, her fingers clutching weakly at Caroline's jacket. She was here. She was real. Caroline held her tighter, pressing frantic kisses to her golden hair. Lily's small voice trembled against her ear. I was waiting. Tears spilled down Caroline's cheeks. I found you, baby. Footsteps. Caroline turned sharply. Evelyn stood a few feet away, watching. Her face was pale, her dark eyes glassy. Caroline's breath hitched. Is it over? Evelyn's gaze flickered toward the darkness beyond the broken windows. And then, she shook her head. Caroline's stomach clenched. What? Evelyn's voice was soft. She'll come back for her. Caroline's blood ran cold. Lily's small fingers gripped her tighter. A wind howled through the broken windows, rattling the walls of the school. And somewhere, deep within the abandoned hallways, a door creaked open. Waiting, watching. Caroline's grip on Lily tightened. She didn't look back. She just ran.